My name is Alara Martel. I'm 29, and my hands smell permanently of rosemary and sourdough starter. To the guests who find their way to our little corner of Quebec, I'm the soul of the auberge Martel, the chef whose tourtière recipe they beg for. To my family, well, to them, I'm the foundation they stand on. So solid and dependable they often forget I'm even there. My older brother, Liam, is the golden one. He's the one who escaped to Toronto, talks in acronyms I don't understand about, fintech, and wears suits that cost more than our hydro bill in January. He's the pride of the Martel family. And me? I'm the one who stayed behind, who traded my acceptance letter to a culinary institute in Lyon for flour-dusted aprons and 4 a.m. wake-up calls. I sacrificed my dream so theirs wouldn't go bankrupt. But it seems some sacrifices are invisible. So, here's my question for you. If you were the only thing holding your entire family together, would you have the strength to be the one to let it all go? Let me know what you'd do in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious. The old grandfather clock in the lobby chimed 5 times. Its familiar groan echoing into the cavernous kitchen. Outside, the world was a soft, silent blanket of white. Inside, the air was already thick with the scent of rising bread, a sharp note of brewing espresso, and the faint, clean smell of pine from the wood-burning oven. The satisfying thump-thump-thump of my knife against the old butcher's block was my morning meditation. On the block today, a small, precious cut of local venison. I had to make it stretch for the weekend specials. C'est quoi, the story of my life. The swinging door creaked open, and my mother, Genevieve, swept in. She was already dressed immaculately. A silk scarf knotted at her neck, a stark contrast to my flour-dusted apron. She didn't look at me, but at the pan on my stove. Alara, chérie, she said, her voice smooth but with an edge as sharp as my best knife. That smells expensive. There was the subtext. It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. I didn't turn around, focusing on the rhythmic dice of my shallots. It's for the Charlevoix pâté. Maman, the one the food blogger raved about last fall. It brings people in. It's a luxury, she murmured, pouring herself a coffee. We need to be thinking about necessities. Liam's wedding is the only thing that matters right now. Ah, yes. The wedding. The reason for the dark circles under my eyes and the permanent knot of anxiety in my stomach. Liam was getting married in 6 weeks. Right here at the auberge. Not for convenience, not for sentiment, but for show. His fiancée, Chloe, came from old Toronto money. And this wedding was meant to be a performance. A declaration that the Martels were just as successful, just as worthy. The truth was, we were hanging on by a thread. That food blogger's review had given us a brief respite, but bookings were down for the winter. The velvet on the dining room chairs was worn thin at the edges, and the grand sign out front had a flicker in the A of auberge that my father, Robert, kept meaning to fix. My phone buzzed on the steel countertop. The screen flashed. Liam. I wiped my hands and answered, putting it on speaker. Morning. You're up early. Morning. L. His voice was frictionless. That smooth, fast-paced Toronto English that always felt a world away. Listen, quick thing. I'm sending you the specs for the ice sculpture. It needs to be a swan. A big one. And Chloe's parents. Just make sure the Côté suite is blocked off for them for the entire week beforehand. They like to settle in. I glanced at the reservation book. The Côté suite, our most expensive room with the lakeside view, was our only hope of turning a profit that week. Liam, that's our premium booking. We'll lose thousands. A sigh crackled through the phone. One of pure impatience. Alara, don't think like a small-town innkeeper. Think bigger picture. This is a business expense. An investment. Their comfort is paramount. Just handle it, okay? He didn't wait for an answer. The line went dead. My mother was watching me. Her expression unreadable. He's right. You know, she said quietly. This wedding must be perfect. Their family, they can open doors for Liam. For all of us. I turned back to my shallots. My knife moving faster now. I didn't say that Liam hadn't contributed a single dollar to the auberge since he'd left. I didn't say that it was my management of our local suppliers, getting us the best produce for pennies on the dollar. That was keeping the lights on. I didn't say that I had already dipped into my own small savings to cover the deposit for the ridiculous marquee tent he'd insisted on. I didn't say any of it. Instead, I opened the heavy, leather-bound book on the counter beside me. My grandmother's recipe book. Its pages were stained with butter and wine. The ink faded, but it was my Bible. It was a book of real, honest things, of food that warmed the soul. It was a legacy of love and hard work. I looked at the elegant, swirling script of my grandmother's recipe for a simple apple tart tatin. And then at the extravagant, multi-page wedding plan Liam had emailed over. And for the first time, I felt a deep, chilling fissure, a crack in the very foundation I'd spent my life trying to hold together. The simmering pot was about to boil over. The crunch of expensive winter tires on the freshly shoveled laneway announced their arrival. I watched from the kitchen window as a glossy black Audi, completely out of place against the rustic backdrop of pine trees and old stone, hummed to a stop. My father, Robert, practically bounded out the front door, his booming laugh echoing in the crisp air before Liam had even cut the engine. Liam emerged from the driver's side, looking like a magazine ad. He wore a tailored wool coat that probably cost as much as our walk-in freezer repairs. He clapped Dad on the back. A performative, hearty gesture. Then, the passenger door opened. Chloe was even more striking in person. Tall, elegant, wrapped in a cashmere coat the color of cream. She moved with a quiet, practiced grace. She smiled at my father. A polite, perfect smile that didn't quite reach her cool, assessing eyes. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my apron, and walked into the lobby, forcing my face into a neutral mask of professional hospitality. Bienvenue, Alara, Dad boomed, draping an arm over Liam's shoulders. Look who's here. I see that, Dad, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Liam pulled me into a quick, one-armed hug that smelled of expensive cologne and city air. The old place looks exactly the same, he said, and it wasn't a compliment. He tossed his leather gloves onto the reception desk. We need to talk logistics. Big time. My mother appeared, fussing over Liam, adjusting his scarf, her face alight with a pride she never showed me. She was polite but visibly nervous around Chloe, offering her tea, coffee, a glass of wine with an almost deferential flutter. I felt a familiar pang, not quite jealousy, but the dull ache of invisibility. To them, I was just part of the scenery, like the stone hearth or the mounted deer head in the dining room. After they had settled in the Côté suite, the one I'd been forced to clear, we all gathered in the main dining room. The fire roared, casting dancing shadows on the heavy wooden beams. Outside, the lake was a sheet of frozen, snow-dusted glass. I had set the great oak table with my presentation, sample menus printed on thick cardstock, a detailed budget breakdown, and a list of our esteemed local suppliers, from Monsieur Dubois' organic vegetables to the cheese from the fromagerie down the road. This was my masterpiece of planning. A wedding that was elegant, authentic to the region, and most importantly, financially viable. So, I began, taking the head of the table. I've designed a menu that celebrates the best of the townships. It's built around a slow-roasted duck with a local maple balsamic glaze. It's impressive, but cost-effective if we... Liam held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. He exchanged a look with Chloe, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Yeah, about that, Liam said, pulling a slim tablet from his briefcase. He slid it across the polished surface of the table. Chloe and I have been working with a planner in Montreal. She's put together a more appropriate vision. On the screen was a sleek, corporate-looking presentation. The title read, Liam and Chloe, a modern luxury experience. I felt the blood drain from my face. My carefully planned menu, my budget sheets, sat untouched, ignored. An oyster bar, to start, Chloe said softly, her voice melodious but firm. With at least 3 varieties. Preferably from PEI and British Columbia. Flown in fresh, of course. Followed by a champagne tower. Liam chimed in, scrolling through the slides. Veuve Clicquot, nothing less. For the main, we're thinking individual rack of lamb. Imported from New Zealand, Or a scallop risotto. The planner knows a caterer who can execute it perfectly. I stared at them, my professional calm beginning to fracture. Liam, Chloe, this is a different world. An oyster bar? Imported lamb? Do you have any idea what that would cost? The budget. Liam waved a dismissive hand, as if I were a fly buzzing around his head. Don't worry about the budget. Worry about the execution. This is our one shot to make an impression on Chloe's family. Her father is a major investor. This isn't just a wedding. It's a networking event. We can't serve them, duck. He said the word, duck, as if it were a plate of dirt. My father, who had eaten my duck recipe every Christmas for the last 10 years and called it the best thing he'd ever tasted, nodded in agreement. He has a point. Alara, you have to have vision. My vision, I said, my voice tight, is to make sure the auberge doesn't go into receivership by the spring. This menu I designed will be profitable. The one you're showing me. I pushed the tablet back towards him. This would bankrupt us. Literally. You're being dramatic. My mother cut in, her tone sharp. You've always been resistant to change. Liam is trying to elevate us. And you're fighting him. The injustice of it was a physical blow. I looked around the table. At my brother, who saw our home as a stage for his ambitions. At my parents, who were so blinded by his perceived success that they couldn't see the cliff they were steering us towards. And at Chloe, who was quietly observing me, her expression a mask of detached politeness. I am not fighting him, I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury I could barely contain. I am trying to save you from yourselves. This entire event is being funded by the revenue I generate in that kitchen. The money for this fantasy, it doesn't exist. Liam leaned forward, his charming smile gone, replaced by a cold, hard glint in his eyes. Then make it exist. Alara, he said, his voice dangerously soft. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Making things work. So, make it work. Don't make me regret having this wedding here. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The warmth from the fire suddenly felt a million miles away. They weren't asking for my help. They were giving me an order. And in that moment, sitting in the heart of the home I had sacrificed everything for, I had never felt more like a stranger. The rage, when it came, was cold and quiet. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I scrubbed. I scoured a perfectly clean copper pot until my knuckles were raw. The rhythmic, abrasive motion the only outlet for the fury coiling in my gut. Make it exist. The arrogance of that command. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement, echoed off the tiled walls. They had sat in the room that my work kept warm, at the table my food paid for, and dismissed my reality as if it were a minor inconvenience. Dinner service was a masterclass in tension. I sent out the venison pâté and the seared scallops I had planned for the weekend specials. It was a silent act of defiance. I would show them what this small-town inn was capable of. The four of them ate in the main dining room, the vast space making their stilted conversation seem even more sparse. From the kitchen, I could hear my father's forced laughter, my mother's brittle chatter about the weather, and Liam's overly loud pronouncements about the stock market. Chloe was mostly silent. Later, needing a specific bottle of ice wine from the cellar to pair with the dessert, I took the old ring of iron keys and headed down the stone steps. The air grew cool and smelled of damp earth and aging oak. As I approached the heavy wooden door, I heard a voice from inside. Liam's voice, but it was different from the smooth, confident baritone he used upstairs. This was sharp, strained, stripped of its polish. Don't tell me it's a temporary dip. Marcus, I can see the damn chart, he hissed into his phone. I need an extension, just until the end of the month. I froze, my hand on the cold iron latch. This wasn't my brother the fintech mogul. This was a cornered animal. No, I can't liquidate anything right now. The optics would be terrible. Listen to me, it's a margin call. I get it, but it's manageable. A pause, pregnant with tension. The wedding. Of course it's still on. This wedding solves everything. You understand? It has to. My blood ran cold. It solves everything. This wasn't about making an impression. It was about a lifeline. This extravagant, bankrupting wedding was his desperate, last-ditch effort to secure his own financial salvation through Chloe's family. He wasn't just risking the auberge for his pride, he was preparing to sacrifice it for his survival. I backed away from the door, the keys silent in my trembling hand. I retreated up the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whole charade, the dismissal of my budget, the pressure, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Later that night, long after my parents had gone to bed, I was in the library, running the numbers again, trying to find a magic solution that didn't exist. The only light came from a single green banker's lamp and the dying orange glow of the embers in the hearth. The wind howled outside, rattling the old window panes. I didn't think anyone else was awake. I looked up. Chloe stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe. Her perfect posture was slightly softened, her face free of makeup. For the first time, she looked less like a porcelain doll and more like a person. I can't sleep, I admitted, closing my laptop. She drifted into the room, her gaze falling on the photographs on the mantelpiece, generations of Martels. My grandparents proudly breaking ground on this very building. This place has a lot of history, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It does, I said, watching her carefully. She ran a finger over a dusty frame. This wedding, it's become much more than I imagined. She turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. Liam is very ambitious. He wants everything to be a statement. The word ambitious hung in the air, a polite substitute for something much harsher. My family is a bit different, she continued, her voice hesitant. They're quiet, they value stability, substance over style. My father always says. It wasn't a question, but I felt the weight of one behind it. She was probing, gently, for an anchor of truth in a sea of performance. Was this place stable? Was the man she was about to marry a man of substance? I could have told her everything. I could have exposed Liam's desperate phone call, the precarious finances, the whole house of cards. But something held me back. It wasn't my secret to tell. And looking at her, I saw a flicker of the same doubt that was churning in my own gut. He wants to make you proud, I said finally, offering a carefully chosen half-truth. Chloe gave me a small, sad smile that, for the first time, reached her eyes. Yes, she said, I suppose that's it. She bid me good night and slipped out of the room, leaving me with the dying fire and a growing sense of dread. The problem was no longer just the unreasonable demands of a spoiled brother. It was a lie, a huge, dangerous lie, and the entire foundation of my family home was being gambled away to maintain it. I had spent the entire day cooking. It was my only defense. My retreat into a world that made sense, a world of precise measurements, reliable chemistry, and honest ingredients. I made bœuf bourguignon, a classic, slow-cooked stew that filled the auberge with the rich, comforting scent of red wine, thyme, and caramelized onions. It was the kind of food that spoke of home, of warmth, of love. It was a lie, and we were all about to eat it. The meal began in near silence, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. My father cleared his throat and talked about the chances of the Canadians making the playoffs. A desperate grasp for normalcy. Liam swirled the wine in his glass. Looking bored, Chloe picked at her food, pushing the tender beef around her plate. Her appetite seemingly gone. My mother watched everyone, her smile as tight as a piano wire. Knowing what I knew now, every moment felt like a performance. Liam's casual confidence seemed like a cheap costume. My parents' pride felt like a willful delusion. I was no longer just an unappreciated daughter. I was the unwilling audience to a tragic play. Liam dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin and placed his cutlery down with a decisive click. So, he began, his voice booming into the silence. Fantastic news. I had a very productive chat with Chef Antoine Dubois' people in Montreal today. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Chef Dubois was a culinary celebrity, a TV personality known for his extravagant, avant-garde creations. He's personally going to oversee the menu. Liam continued, beaming at Chloe as if presenting her with a crown. We're talking molecular gastronomy, food as art. It's going to be a masterpiece. He's sending the contract over tomorrow. My father gasped, suitably impressed. Antoine Dubois? Vraiment? Son. That's incredible. I placed my fork down very slowly. The sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. No. I said. Liam's smile faltered. What do you mean? No. I mean, no. I repeated, my voice even but hard as frozen earth. I looked him directly in the eye. We cannot afford the deposit for a caterer like that. Let alone the final bill. The conversation is over. For the first time since he'd arrived. I had given him a hard, unequivocal, no. No alternatives. No suggestions. No compromises. Just a wall. Liam laughed. A short, sharp bark devoid of humor. Alara, you're not listening. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. This is what's happening. It's for the good of the family. Is it? I challenged. The knowledge of his margin call giving me a bitter strength. Is it for the good of the family to sign a contract we have absolutely no way of honoring? To write a check that will bounce so high it will shatter what little reputation we have left? You've always been jealous of him. My mother snapped. Her voice suddenly shrill. She placed a protective hand on Liam's arm. You stay here, in this small place, and you can't stand to see him succeed on a bigger stage. Maman, this has nothing to do with jealousy. I said, my voice pleading for reason. This is about math. It's about survival. She's trying to sabotage the wedding. Liam said, turning to Chloe, his face a mask of wounded pride. I told you she would. She doesn't want to see me happy. That is not true. I shot back, my voice finally rising. I am the only one being realistic here. You're being selfish. Robert, my father, finally spoke, his voice thick with disappointment. He wasn't looking at me, but at his plate. Your brother needs this. We need this. And you're letting your stubbornness ruin everything. The betrayal was absolute. My father, who had taught me how to balance a ledger, was now telling me to ignore the numbers. My mother, who had taught me how to cook, was now accusing me of poisoning the family's future. I looked at Chloe. She was pale, staring at her hands in her lap. A silent, horrified witness to the ugliness being unearthed. She refused to meet anyone's gaze. I felt cornered. Breathless. I have given everything to this place. I whispered, the words catching in my throat. My time, my dreams, my money, everything. My mother, Genevieve, looked at me then. Her face was calm, her eyes as cold and clear as ice on the lake. She spoke with a terrifying quietness that cut through the emotion of the room. Her words precise, deliberate, and designed to kill. You talk of gifts and sacrifices. She said softly. You want to give your brother a wedding gift? She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. You know what, Alara? The greatest gift for your brother's wedding is you vanishing from this family. Your absence. That would be the most valuable thing you could contribute. Silence. A deep, profound, bottomless silence. The words hung in the air, shimmering with cruelty. Vanishing. Absence. I looked at my mother's placid face. I looked at my brother, who had a flicker of smug triumph in his eyes. I looked at my father, who stared intently at his buff bourguignon, refusing to meet my gaze. He was a coward. They all were. They hadn't just disagreed with me. They had erased me. They had declared my very presence a liability. The simmering pot hadn't just boiled over. It had exploded. In the ringing silence that followed my mother's words, something inside me shifted. The searing pain of betrayal didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It transformed from a messy, hot agony into something cold, hard, and perfectly clear. My absence, my most valuable contribution. D'accord, fine. I would give them a gift they would never forget. I looked at their faces one last time. My mother, serene and righteous. My father, studying the wood grain of the table as if it held the secrets to the universe. My brother, a smug victor. I didn't see my family anymore. I saw strangers I had spent a lifetime trying to please. Very slowly, I folded my linen napkin and placed it beside my plate of uneaten buff bourguignon. I pushed my heavy oak chair back, the legs making no sound on the thick rug. I stood up. No one spoke. No one looked at me. It was as if their pronouncement had already rendered me invisible. I turned and walked out of the dining room. My back straight. The sound of my own steady footsteps on the old wooden stairs was the only sound in the house. Thump, 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 the slow, rhythmic beat of a heart learning to belong only to itself. My room, under the eaves of the auberge, had always been my sanctuary. Now, it was just a room. A collection of things I no longer needed. I didn't open my closet. I didn't pull a suitcase from under the bed. Instead, I walked to the small alcove where I kept the tools of my trade. My worn, leather knife roll lay on a small table. I untied the leather straps and unrolled it, the familiar scent of oiled steel and worn leather filling the air. My tools, my real identity. I ran a finger over the smooth, wooden handle of my 8-inch chef's knife, the one with the perfect weight and balance. It felt like an extension of my own hand. Next to it, my paring knife, my boning knife, my serrated bread knife with a small chip in the handle from that time I dropped it during a chaotic summer service. Each one was a memory, a scar, a piece of my story. I carefully wiped each blade and secured it in its slot. The metallic snick of each one was a sound of finality. Next, I went to my nightstand. Laying there, where most people kept novels or journals, was my grandmother's recipe book. I picked it up, its weight familiar and comforting. I traced the faded gold lettering of her name on the cover. This wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was my inheritance, the one true, untainted thing they had ever given me. I wrapped it carefully in a wool scarf and placed it next to my knife roll. That was it. That was all I needed to take. I sat at the small wooden desk by the window. Outside, the moonlight cast a blue, ethereal glow on the fresh snow. It was beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent. I took a piece of the auberge's official letterhead from the drawer and a pen. My hand did not shake. The note was short. To the management of Auberge Martel. Please accept this as my formal and immediate resignation from the position of head chef. I will not be completing a 2-week notice period due to unforeseen circumstances. Sincerely, Alara Martel. No emotion, no accusations, just a clean, professional severance. A full stop. I walked back downstairs. The low murmur of conversation had resumed in the dining room. A signal that my absence had already been absorbed. Accepted. I didn't look in. I walked to the front reception desk and placed the folded letter squarely in the center, where my father would find it when he did the books in the morning. I put on my heavy winter coat, pulled my toque down over my ears, and slipped out the front door, closing it gently behind me. The cold air hit my face, sharp and cleansing. It felt like my first real breath in years. I didn't take the old pickup truck I used for market runs. It was, after all, their property. I started walking. The only sound was the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of my boots on the pristine snow of the laneway. Behind me, the Auberge Martel glowed with warm, inviting light, a perfect picture of rustic charm, a perfect lie. In front of me, the road was a dark ribbon disappearing into the woods. I had my skills, my inheritance, and $47 in my wallet. I had no idea where I was going. But for the first time in my life, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was finally walking home. Bien sûr. The quiet exit was the first stone. Now, we watch the avalanche. It starts. This part is not told from Alara's direct perspective, but as she pieced it together later, a story of chaos told secondhand, which only adds to the sense of detached, inevitable collapse. Part 6. The Cascade Effect. Hugh Ung Domino. Boy Gun. Tuan La Din Ra Dam Kuoi Tai Auberge Martel. Suvang Mat Kua Lara Kong Con La Mo Quang Trong I Am Lang. No Da Tro Ton Mo Con Lak Hun Lon. I didn't see any of this. Of course, by the time the sun rose on my first day of freedom, I was already on a bus heading southwest. The snow-covered fields of Quebec blurring past my window. I pieced together the story of that week later, mostly from my friend Sasha, who ran the local pottery studio and heard all the town gossip, and from a few guilt-ridden text messages from one of the young line cooks I had trained. It began, apparently, with the note. My father found it at 7 a.m., sitting on the reception desk like a small white bomb. Sasha told me the waitress who was on shift said he read it, His face went ashen, and he simply walked into his office and shut the door. It was my mother who began the frantic symphony of chaos. Her first call was to my mobile. It went straight to the voicemail I had already disabled. Her second was a flurry of angry texts, each more hysterical than the last. Where are you? Your brother's wedding is this week. How could you be so selfish? Day 1. The kitchen breaks. The immediate problem was breakfast. Without my prep lists, without my organization, the 2 part-time cooks were lost. Orders were sent to the wrong tables. The hollandaise sauce split. The pancakes were burnt. Guests, used to the auberge's flawless service, began to complain for the first time in years. My mother, in a desperate attempt to project authority, swept into the kitchen and started giving contradictory orders, making everything 10 times worse. The cooks, who respected me but feared her, simply shut down. Day 2. The suppliers rebel. My real value, the part my family never understood, wasn't just in my cooking, it was in my relationships. On Tuesday, Monsieur Dubois, the old farmer who grew the most beautiful organic vegetables, arrived with his delivery. He normally ran on a monthly tab with me. Seeing my father's flustered face, he politely insisted on cash on delivery. He wasn't being cruel, he was being a good businessman. Without me at the helm, the auberge was a risk. Then the butcher called. The special order of beef tenderloin for the rehearsal dinner had been misplaced. A new order would take a week. When Liam got on the phone and tried to throw his weight around, the butcher simply said, "Désolé, monsieur, there is nothing I can do." The truth was, he wouldn't do it for Liam. He would have moved a mountain for me. Day 3. The system fails. On Wednesday, the ancient grease trap in the kitchen finally clogged completely, backing up sinks and filling the kitchen with a foul stench. It was a problem I had been nursing along for months, knowing the delicate dance required to keep it clear. My father, in a fit of misplaced bravado, tried to fix it himself with a pipe wrench. A cracked fitting and a minor flood followed. They had to call an emergency plumber from Sherbrooke, who charged them an astronomical holiday rate. All the while, Chloe's family was due to arrive. The Côté suite was ready, but the rest of the inn felt frayed, tense. Staff were whispering. The air, usually filled with the scent of baking bread and wood smoke, now smelled of burnt toast and anxiety. Day 4. The money problem. Liam, seeing his perfect networking event crumbling into a rustic farce, finally tried to solve the problem the only way he knew how, with money he didn't have. He got back on the phone with Chef Antoine Dubois in Montreal, explaining the personnel issue. Chef Dubois, smelling blood in the water, was happy to help. For a price his original quote doubled, he now required a non-refundable $50,000 risk premium deposit in cash. By the next morning, Sasha told me she saw Liam in town that afternoon. At the bank, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was on his phone, pacing back and forth, his voice the same sharp, desperate hiss I'd heard in the wine cellar. Day 5. The facade cracks. By Friday, the day before the wedding, the auberge was in a state of barely controlled panic. My mother's elegant composure had cracked, revealing a terrified, shrewish woman I barely recognized. My father was drinking whiskey in his office, and Liam was a phantom, constantly on his phone, promising solutions that never materialized. The celebrity chef was not coming. The oyster bar was a fantasy. They had managed to secure a last-minute catering order from a chain restaurant in the city, the kind of place that served lukewarm chicken in gelatinous sauces. The local staff they'd hired for the wedding started calling in sick, not wanting to be associated with the impending disaster. The beautiful, elegant wedding, the event that was meant to solve everything, had become a ticking time bomb. The cascade had begun, and all I had done was quietly walk away. All I had done was give them exactly what they'd asked for, my absence. The story of the wedding day came to me mostly from Sasha. She was invited out of a sense of small-town obligation, and she went out of a sense of morbid curiosity. She sat near the back, a quiet observer to the entire train wreck, texting me updates when she could slip away to the washroom. What she described was not just a failure, It was a public execution of my family's pride. It started beautifully, she said. The ceremony itself was held in the main hall, in front of the great stone hearth which my father had, for once, managed to fill with a roaring, picturesque fire. Chloe was a vision in a simple, elegant gown, and Liam looked handsome in his bespoke suit. They looked the part. They had practiced the poses. But Sasha said there was a tremor in Liam's hand as he placed the ring on Chloe's finger. And Chloe's smile was a masterpiece of determined effort. A beautiful, fragile thing that didn't have any joy behind it. The real unraveling began at the reception. The guests, a mix of our small-town neighbors and Chloe's wealthy Toronto circle, mingled awkwardly in the lobby. There were no artfully arranged canapés. No signature cocktails Alara style. Instead, there were lukewarm mini quiches on a tray. Looking sad and beige, Liam had tried to replace my local, rustic floral arrangements with an expensive order from the city. But it had arrived late. The flowers were already wilting in the overheated room. The main event, however, was the dinner. The chain restaurant caterers served the meal with clattering, indifferent efficiency. Sasha was seated at a table with Chloe's aunt and uncle. She watched, mesmerized, as Chloe's aunt, a woman who looked like she was carved from ice, stared at the plate placed before her. It was a pale, rubbery-looking chicken breast, glistening with a sauce so glossy it looked like varnish. Beside it lay 3 spears of limp, gray-green asparagus and a lumpy scoop of instant mashed potatoes. The aunt picked up her fork, poked at the chicken, and then placed the fork down again without taking a single bite. She spent the rest of the meal sipping her water and talking about her last trip to Provence. It was, Sasha said, the most devastatingly polite display of disgust she had ever witnessed. All around the room, the Toronto guests were doing the same, moving food around their plates. Their conversation strained. The next disaster was technical. The online reservation system I used was linked to my personal account and required a monthly password update. I always handled myself. I hadn't, of course, shared the new password. Around 9 p.m., as dinner was mercifully ending, several of Chloe's relatives who were staying the night went to the front desk to get their room keys. A harried-looking temp worker, hired for the evening, couldn't get into the system. It had locked him out. Panic set in. It turned out my father, in a moment of sheer incompetence, had manually promised the same 3 suites to 6 different families. That's when the yelling started. But it wasn't the guests who were yelling. It was the Martels. Sasha saw it all from the doorway of the dining hall. Liam, his face flushed red with champagne and rage, had cornered my father by the reception desk. How could you be so stupid? Liam hissed, his voice loud enough for half the guests to hear. This was the one thing you had to handle. Don't you blame me, my father shot back, his voice thick with whiskey. I'm not the one who demanded a wedding we couldn't afford. I'm not the one who drove his own sister out of the house. Then, my mother joined the fray, her face a contorted mask of fury. She jabbed a finger at Liam. This is your fault. All of it. You and your vision. You pushed and pushed until she broke. I told you she would break. The 3 of them, the holy trinity of Martel pride, were standing there, under the elegant iron chandelier, tearing each other apart. They were laying bare all the private, ugly truths for their horrified guests to see. The desperation, the incompetence, the blame. They were showing everyone the rot that had been festering under the floorboards of the auberge for years. And Chloe? Sasha said the last thing she saw before she decided it was time to leave was Chloe, standing alone near the now dying fire. She hadn't joined the argument. She was just watching the family she had married into self-destruct. Her perfect posture was gone. She was slumped, her bouquet of wilting flowers hanging limply from her hand. Her face, Sasha said, was perfectly blank, her eyes wide with the dawning, catastrophic realization of the mistake she had just made. The performance was over. The house of cards had fallen. The chaos of the wedding felt like something I'd watched in a movie. A lifetime ago. I had spent the first few weeks after leaving in a sort of numb haze, working odd kitchen jobs in anonymous towns, saving every dollar. By the time spring thawed the last of the snow, I had found my way to Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was the opposite of home, gentle, rolling, and lush. A land pregnant with the sweet promise of grapes and peaches. I wasn't a head chef anymore. I was a line cook at a small, bustling bistro called The Lark's Landing. The work was demanding but honest. There were no family politics. No simmering resentments. Just the shared goal of creating beautiful food. The head chef, a brisk, no-nonsense woman named Anya, judged me only on the quality of my knife work and the consistency of my sauces. For the first time in my life, my value was clear, professional, and blessedly simple. I was good at my job. That was enough. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for a decade began to loosen. I started to sleep through the night. I'd spend my days off wandering through the vineyards. The sun warm on my face. The air smelling of damp earth and blooming flowers. I was healing. That's how I met Mr. Dubois. He wasn't the farmer from back home. This was Jean-Pierre Dubois, a retired vigneron, a winemaker, in his late 70s. With hands as gnarled as the old vines he tended and eyes the color of pale Chardonnay. His family had been growing grapes in this region for a century. He was a local legend. Every Saturday, he would sit at the small corner table at the bistro for lunch. Always ordering the fish special and a glass of his own Sauvignon Blanc. One afternoon, Anya let me experiment with the sauce for the pickerel. I made a delicate beurre blanc, infused with lemon verbena from the kitchen garden. It was a taste of summer. Light and fragrant. Anya brought the clean plate back to the kitchen. A rare, small smile on her face. Mr. Dubois wants to know who made the sauce. My heart gave a little flutter of nerves. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the dining room. He looked up at me. His gaze sharp and intelligent. "You are new," he said. It wasn't a question. His English was thick with the French accent of his ancestors. "Yes, sir. I'm Alara." "Alara," he repeated, testing the name. "This sauce, it has a good soul. It is not trying too hard. It knows what it is." He looked at me then. A long, searching look. "There is a sadness in your hands. But the skill is still there." I was so taken aback by his directness I couldn't speak. He saw me, not as a cook, not as a stranger, but as a person. "You should come to my vineyard tomorrow. It is your day off." "No," he said. "The vines. They are good company. They do not talk nonsense." And so, the next day, I did. His vineyard, Clos Dubois, was a stunning sweep of green. Rows of vines marching neatly over the rolling hills. He walked me through them. His pace slow and deliberate. He didn't ask about my past or where I was from. He talked about the vines. "You see this one?" he said, stopping at a gnarled, thick trunk. "It is an old vine. It struggled for years. The soil was poor, too much shade." He took a pair of pruning shears from his pocket. With a decisive snip, he cut away a long, unproductive cane. "Every winter, we must prune," he explained, his eyes focused on his work. "We cut away the dead wood. All the parts that take energy but give no fruit. It looks brutal, no? But if you do not, the vine cannot concentrate its strength. It will produce many leaves. It will look busy, but the grapes will be small and sour." He let the dead branch fall to the earth. "You must be brave enough to cut away what does not serve you. Only then," he said, gently touching a tiny, budding cluster of new grapes, "can you have a new vintage. A better one." The metaphor was so clear, so profound, it struck me silent. He knew. Somehow, he knew. We spent the rest of the afternoon on his stone veranda overlooking the vineyard. He brought out a fresh baguette, some local cheese, and a bottle of his finest Pinot Noir. We ate in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ache of my past was still there, a phantom limb that sometimes throbbed with memory. But sitting there, with this quiet, wise man, surrounded by the peaceful, patient work of the earth, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't thought possible. I wasn't just running away from a toxic past. I was actively cultivating a new future. I was pruning the dead wood. And waiting, patiently, for a new harvest. Here is part 9. The past, no matter how far you run, always sends one last echo. This chapter is about facing that echo and realizing it no longer has the power to harm you. Part 9. The aftermath and the letter. How qua and la tu. Boy gun. Bon thang sao du. Moi tu da den Niagara on the lake. Kong ki trong lan. Say lan. Va nung von no dang triu nam qua. San sang cho moi tu hoch. The autumn harvest in Niagara is a season of gentle, purposeful work. The frantic energy of summer gives way to a quiet, focused hum. My life had found a similar rhythm. I was no longer just a line cook at the Lark's Landing. Anya had made me her sous chef. The promotion came with more responsibility, more creative freedom, and a modest pay raise that allowed me to rent a small, sun-filled apartment above a bookstore in town. For the first time, I had a space that was entirely my own. I hadn't spoken to my family since the night I walked away. I didn't need to. The silence was my answer. The news, when it came, was not a shock. It felt more like the final, inevitable page of a book I had already finished reading. I was on my day off, sitting on Mr. Dubois' veranda and helping him shell beans, when my phone rang. It was Sasha. Hey Elle, she said, her voice soft with a familiar pity. Just thought you should hear it from me before you see it somewhere else. The bank officially foreclosed on the auberge this morning. There's a big, ugly sign on the front door. It's over. I stopped shelling, a handful of pods resting in my lap. Over. The word didn't bring the sting of pain I might have once expected. It didn't bring a rush of triumphant joy, either. It just felt heavy. Final. And them? I asked, my voice quiet. Lost everything, Sasha said. The inn, the house, all of it. They're renting a little bungalow on the edge of town. People are talking, you know, about the wedding, about Liam. She hesitated. His engagement to Chloe is off. Her family pulled the plug right after the wedding disaster. He's back in Quebec, working some dead-end sales job. The whole house of cards, it's gone. So, the house of cards had finally fallen. I felt no triumph, just a quiet, hollow ache for a home that was never really mine in a family that had never really been a family. I thanked Sasha for calling, hung up, and looked out at the neat, thriving rows of Mr. Dubois' vineyard. He didn't ask what the call was about. He just pushed the bowl of beans closer to me, a silent invitation to return to the simple, honest work of the present. The letter arrived a week later. It was forwarded from my last known address. The envelope bearing my mother's elegant, looping handwriting, though it looked shakier than I remembered. It felt like a ghost in my mailbox. An artifact from another life. For 2 days, I left it on my kitchen counter. Unopened. It felt radioactive, and I was afraid of what might happen if I let the poison out. On the 3rd day, I made myself a cup of strong tea, sat at my small kitchen table, and opened it. The letter was 4 pages long. A rambling, tear-stained mess of guilt, blame, and desperation. She wrote of my father's failing health, a classic, of their public humiliation, of their financial ruin. But woven between the lines of self-pity was the sharp, familiar hook of manipulation. If you had just been more reasonable, none of this would have happened. I read, your brother's life is in tatters. And he blames himself. But we know you carry this burden too. It was your departure that was the final stone that sunk us. Your father asks for you every day. We are old and tired, Alara, and we can't fix this alone. If you ever truly loved this family, you will come home and help us rebuild. It is your duty. Only you can fix the mess that has been made. The old me, the Alara of less than a year ago, would have shattered. The guilt would have consumed me. I would have been on the next bus home, ready to pick up the pieces of the lives they had broken. But I wasn't her anymore. I took the letter with me to the vineyard that afternoon. I found Mr. Dubois tying up a stray vine, his movements slow and certain. I didn't say a word, just handed him the pages. He read them, his brow furrowed. He finished, refolded the letter carefully, and handed it back to me. He looked at my face, then at the healthy, fruit-laden vines around us. They are not asking for you, ma chérie, he said, his voice gentle but firm. They are asking for the person who used to fix things for them. The person who would absorb their mistakes. He gestured to a pile of pruned, dead branches near the edge of the vineyard, waiting to be burned. That person is gone. You cut her away last winter. Remember? I looked at the brittle, lifeless branches, then back at the vibrant, living vineyard. He was right. That version of me was dead wood. And my new life, this fragile, beautiful new vintage, was just beginning. The letter in my hand felt like nothing more than a dry, rustling leaf from a season that was long over. I held the letter in my hand for a long moment. Its flimsy paper filled with the weight of a past I refused to carry. Mr. Dubois was right. The Alara they were crying for, the family fixer, the silent shock absorber for their mistakes, was gone. I had pruned her away. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had first read my mother's desperate plea. I took out a fresh piece of stationery in my best pen. The reply I wrote was not born of anger or spite, but of a quiet, unshakable peace. Genevieve and Robert, thank you for your letter. I am sorry to hear of your hardships. And I wish you well in the future. My life is here in Ontario now. I will not be coming back. Sincerely, Alara. Beside the note, I opened my checkbook. I looked up my old bank statements and found the record of the small investment I had made in the auberge all those years ago. I wrote a check for that exact amount. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a symbol. It was the last thread connecting me to their financial ruin, to their chaos. It was a repayment of a debt I never owed. An act of final, absolute severance. I sealed the note and the check in an envelope and mailed it the next morning. As the envelope slipped from my fingers into the red Canada Post mailbox, I did not feel sadness or loss. I felt the light, clean feeling of a slate wiped clean. 2 years later, the sign, hanging from a beautifully restored heritage building in the heart of Niagara-on-the-Lake, was carved from local oak. It read, L.A. Recolt. The Harvest. Tonight was the grand opening of my restaurant. My restaurant. The inside was alive, glowing with warmth and the happy, buzzing energy of a full house. The air smelled of roasting garlic, fresh thyme, and the buttery scent of pastry. On the walls, Sasha's beautiful, earthy pottery was displayed. After a year of long-distance calls, she had finally packed up her studio in Quebec and moved to Niagara, declaring that the town needed better ceramics and that I apparently needed a better business partner. She was now the brilliant, smiling manager who greeted every guest like an old friend. I stood in the pass of my open kitchen, a space I had designed myself, all clean lines, polished copper, and efficiency. I watched my team move with a quiet, professional rhythm. They were cooks I had hired and trained. A team built on mutual respect, not fear or obligation. At the best table in the house, near the window overlooking the town's main street, sat Mr. Dubois. He was dressed in a tweed jacket, his eyes sparkling with a pride that felt more real and paternal than any look my own father had ever given me. Beside him sat Anya, my old boss from the Lark's Landing, who had become a fierce friend and supporter. She raised her glass to me, a gesture of profound respect. Near the end of the night, when the last dessert had been served, Sasha brought out a bottle of Mr. Dubois' finest sparkling wine, a vintage he had been saving for this exact occasion. She gathered our small group of friends together at the bar. I wiped my hands on my apron, my heart feeling almost too full for my chest. Sasha handed me a glass, her eyes shining. A speech, chef, she said, and the others cheered. I looked at their faces. My chosen family. I thought of the long road that had led me here, the cold night I walked away with nothing but my knives and a book, the quiet months of healing, the hard years of saving and planning. I don't have much of a speech, I began, my voice thick with emotion. I just know that for a long time, I thought a harvest was something you owed to the people who planted the seeds. But I've learned. I raised my glass, looking from Sasha to Anya to the kind, gentle face of Mr. Dubois. I've learned that a true harvest comes from the roots you choose to grow yourself. It comes from pruning away the dead wood to make room for new life. So, this isn't a toast to the past. My eyes scanned the beautiful, vibrant, successful room I had built. It's a toast to the harvest, to good soil, to chosen family, and to a beautiful future. Sante, Sante, they all echoed. The taste of the wine was crisp, bright, and full of promise. I smiled, a genuine, deep smile that came from a place of profound contentment. I turned back to my kitchen, the heart of my home, and got ready for the next service. I was exactly where I belonged. At the heart of Alara's story lies a quiet but profound Canadian truth. That true resilience isn't just about weathering the storm, but about knowing when to walk out of the cold and build your own shelter. Her journey isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. It's the difficult, often painful, realization that your value isn't determined by the role you're assigned in your family's story, but by the one you have the courage to write for yourself. Life sometimes requires us to become wise gardeners of our own well-being. We must be brave enough to prune the dead wood, the toxic relationships, the draining obligations, the unfair expectations that give no fruit, not out of malice, but to allow our energy to foster new, healthier growth. It's a process that demands immense strength, forcing us to untangle our sense of duty from our right to happiness. What blossoms from that space is often more beautiful than we could have imagined. A chosen family, built on mutual respect. A purpose built on true passion. And a profound sense of peace that comes from authoring your own life. Alara's greatest triumph wasn't her restaurant's success. It was the moment she realized her own worth was not up for negotiation. It was her most valuable, most personal harvest. This kind of courage looks different for tout le monde. For some, it's a difficult conversation over a cup of coffee. For others, it's a quiet exit. It's a journey that can feel lonely. But you are not alone in it. We would be honored if you shared a lesson you've learned about setting boundaries or finding your own path in the comments below. Take good care of yourselves and each other.